Hello everybody. I hope you're all doing really well. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your nice comments and the thumbs up on my last video from Huangshan in China. I really appreciate it. The video was a lot of fun to make, and of course the trip was excellent. So that really does help the video production when you come away with half decent images and half decent video as well. But I really appreciate it, so thank you very much. This coming Saturday, hopefully I'll have a second video out from that trip. But in the meantime, I thought I would throw in a quick video about some of my processing. Now, I do most of my processing in Photoshop, but I know a lot of you probably just use Lightroom. So I'll process this image in Lightroom because you can more or less get the same effects. Lightroom is a little bit more intuitive, whereas Photoshop, you can really dig deep into some of the more detailed parts of an image. So I'm going to process an image that I didn't have in the video. The other reason why I'm making this video is that I have another announcement to make, but I didn't want to just make the video about the announcement. All right, why don't we get right to the processing then? All right. Okay, so this is the photograph that I've picked out to process. Some of you may recognize this from my video or a similar facsimile of this. This image here is more or less the same area, but I've cropped it to bring more attention to these peaks at the back here and the clouds that are kind of enveloping this whole area here. You'll notice that in this image there's some quite nice light, but it all seems to be over here, and that was one of the reasons why I cropped it to a square, to bring more attention to this location rather than over here. But what I'm going to do in this photograph is I'm going to process it normally, and I'm going to try and brighten up this area to get the attention more over into the center here than this area here. So how do we go ahead and do that? Okay, the first thing that I do with any photograph that I bring into Lightroom is I go into the lens corrections over on the right here, the right panel, and I will click both of these boxes here. Now, if you've enabled lens corrections in camera, then you probably don't need to click this one here. The chromatic aberration I always click, especially with this lens. This is a 24 to 120 kit lens. I love the focal length, but as far as lenses goes, it's not my best lens. The 24 to 72.8 is a much better lens. But I like the focal length. There's a number of reasons why I still use that lens. First of all, when I bought it, it was quite a bit cheaper than the 24 to 70, about a third of the price. The second reason being is that it's lighter, so whenever I go backpacking, it's a great lens for that. Now, it's not as sharp as, say, some of the other lenses out there, but to be honest with you, for what I use it for, which is 99% just posting images online with the odd print, nobody is going to really notice the difference. And even with large prints, the people that I sell my prints to are generally not photographers, and they're not pixel peeking at my prints. So does it really matter? Well, if it's a personal thing, yes, but honestly, you're really not going to notice a huge difference in the final products. Chromatic aberration, it does have some of that, and sometimes it's worse than others. So if I zoom in, say, to 2 to 1 here, and unclick the box here, you'll notice that there's a little bit of fringing around the edge here. There's some green there, and there's probably pink and purple on the other side here. Yeah, see right here. But again, this is at 200%. It's minimal. But anyway, I'll click it, and I'll click the enable profile corrections as well. Okay, the next step is sharpening. Now, generally speaking, I don't do an awful lot of sharpening on my RAW files. I wait until I figure out what the output is. So say I'm making a 16 by 20 print, then I will sharpen it then for that for that medium, or if I'm using it to post online, then I'll sharpen it according to whatever I'm posting it to. So I generally just leave it on the default. Occasionally I might fiddle with it a little bit more, but as you can see, the sharpness is pretty half decent, even with that 24:120. If you go to the corners here, way down here, you start to get a little bit soft, but honestly, people are really not going to notice that. So Gavin, you got any trips planned this year?
Yeah, I'm really excited about that Faroe Islands workshop.
Oh yeah. Oh God, I'd love to go there.
Would you now?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you just join me and be like a co-leader on this workshop?
What types of things are going to be shooting?
Oh, we've got dramatic waterfalls that pour off of cliffs directly into the ocean. We've got epic seascapes, beautiful islands, cultural, historical landmarks, and lots of green.
Oh, I love green. That sounds brilliant. You know what? We can make it really exclusive.
Yeah.
Like invite maybe, I don't know, 10 people?
Just 10 people.
And what kinds of things would we include in that?
Well, let's include accommodation,
Yeah.
transportation, and of course, instruction from 2 very attractive instructors. Well, 1.
Yeah, me.
Registration for this workshop opens on March 27th and it's only open for 1 week. So if you want to get on this, it closes April 3rd. Jump on it.
Hope to see you there.
All right.
Okay, so the next step, I'm just going up to the basic panel here and just do some overall kind of adjustments to the image. So the first adjustment I'm going to do is I'm going to warm it up a little bit because it looks a little bit cool to me. So I'm just going to pull the yellow over a little bit. A word about tint here. I hardly ever use the tint. Occasionally I'll use it for forest photography, but I don't fiddle with it because every time I pull over into the magenta here, it always looks too red to me, and the same with the green. So I try to leave it at a 0 or +1. So I just don't touch that. Exposure. So what I want to do here is open up these shadows. Obviously the shadows are very dark. The highlights are exposed almost perfectly. So for this image, I actually exposed for the clouds, the brightest areas. So of course, as soon as you do that, then any of the shadows or the dark areas are going to be extremely dark. So if you look down here, you can actually see the blacks are starting to get a little bit clogged up here. And actually, if I pull the black slider down, you can see that we're right on the verge of getting no detail whatsoever. So the first thing I'm going to do is give this a little bit more exposure and open up the shadows a bit more. And you'll notice it's improved drastically already. The blacks I generally don't touch. If we just zoom in here, okay, we'll just pull them back a little bit. The thing is that as soon as we start fiddling with the sliders, with the shadows and the highlights, say I bring the whites down, it starts to really flatten out the image, and that's not a bad thing. If I was bringing this into Photoshop, then I can adjust it from there. I kind of like starting off with a flat image, but if I'm just working at it in Lightroom, then I don't really want to flatten it out. I don't want it to look HDR-ish. So we'll leave the whites for now. We're just going to try and fiddle with this so that we get what we want more or less on the rocks and the frosted trees down here. I'm going to warm it up just a little bit. The vibrance, bring up a little bit. And of course we keep adjusting to taste as we go along. Okay, the clarity I'm not going to touch at all, or the dehaze. The vibrance, I've definitely brought it up just a bit too much. Okay. All right, that looks pretty good overall. But you'll notice as soon as you look at this photograph, we look at this cliff here, which isn't a bad thing, but I want the viewer's attention to go over to here. So how are we going to do that? Okay, so I've more or less got the image at a kind of a base exposure of where I want it. So the next thing I'm going to do is just go up to this little box here, and it says 1/16. I'm just going to reduce the size of this all the way down. I'm going to grab the radial tool here and just make a really big radial. I'm just going to turn it just slightly here. So what I want to do is I want to reduce the exposure of the sky but maintain the exposure of the mountainside here. So how can we do that? Okay, so I just adjust like that. And then what I'm going to do now is go over to the range mask and just go to luminance. Now Thomas Heaton did a video of this a few weeks ago, which was really good. So I'll just run over it really quickly. What I want to do is I want to affect the exposure of the sky, but not necessarily the mountain. So this range mask will allow you to do that. So if you look over here, it says range, and on the left side, that's your shadows. So when you bring it up to the center, it doesn't affect the shadows so much. And if you go over to the right here and bring that down, then anything that you do to the image won't affect the highlights so much. So what we want to do here now, first of all, I've got the selected mask on just so I can see which areas in general my adjustments are going to affect, which is the sky here. But we're trying to keep this area bright. So something like that. Okay, I'm just going to turn the mask off. And I'm just going to bring the exposure down just a little bit. And the shadows. Increase the contrast. The highlights, I'm going to bring down a little bit. And the whites, not too much. I want to feather it a bit more. Okay, that looks half decent. Now I'm just going to go down to the mask here. I've clicked on the show luminance mask, and I'm just going to bring the slider up for the shadows area. And you'll notice that all of a sudden the mask is starting to disappear from the mountainside, which is what I want. Something like that. The highlights will leave, and then the smoothness, because we want it to be more of a gradual thing. We don't want it to be too abrupt. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that works okay. Okay, now I'm just going to go over to where it says new here, and I'm going to make another radial mask. This time quite a bit smaller, and actually we could probably make this a little bit larger here so we can see what we're doing. So with this radial mask, what I'm going to do is brighten up this area. So I'm going to feather it and just bring the exposure up just slightly. Oops. So you'll notice that it actually increased the exposure around the radial tool and not inside, because I forgot to click on this little box here, invert. And you'll notice that now it's just affecting the area inside the circle here. So we'll just play with that until we get somewhat of an effect that we want, but we don't want it to look too obvious. It's just a matter of playing around with it until it gets to the point where it looks right to you. You'll notice that if I go too far, then the highlights start to get blown out. So I want to bring them just below that point. Just keep sliding the whites down, down, down until there's no red left. Something like that. Just zoom out here. We'll go to 1.8. And if I click on this little box here, you can kind of see the effect that we've had on this area. So you'll notice that all of a sudden, whereas our eye is looking at this column of rock here, now if I click on this, the effect that we've made with the radial tool, it's brightened up this area here, and now we're looking at this area a little bit more than this one. But we could still improve this. We could probably darken this area a little bit and perhaps brighten this area just a little bit more. So I'm just going to turn off the Radial tool here. Okay, now this image is still looking a little bit flat, and even though the outside of the frame is really interesting, the most interesting part for me is this central portion here, these jagged peaks coming up and this lit area here. So what I do in a lot of my photographs is I actually add a vignette to kind of darken the edges so that your attention is brought more to this central area. And you'll notice that in this photograph here, which was in my video, the bottom is very dark, and you can see a bit of a vignette in the clouds here, and the central portion is quite bright. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going over to the Radial tool again, and I'm just going to make a general radial. I'll probably extend it out to the edges a little bit here. And then I'm just going to start bringing the exposure down to a point where I like it. No, I don't want it so dark that, you know, this is black, black, black. That looks pretty good there. You'll notice that now all of a sudden your attention is brought to this area because it's just so dark around here. Now the blacks are getting a little bit dark, so what I'm going to do is brighten them up just a tad, or flatten them out. Okay, that looks pretty good. And this area, let's just try and feather that a little bit and see what that does. See, I don't want to brighten this up too much because I want the attention on this section here more than here. So something like that actually might look better. We can always brighten these up afterwards if they're too dark. Just turn that a little bit. As you can see, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's all by feel and what looks good to you. See, I quite like that too, but then this is getting a little bit too dark, so if we extend it to about there. Alright, and we're just going to bring up the blacks just a little bit more. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So if you press F on your keyboard, it'll make a black background and you can get a better idea of what you're looking at. Okay, so we're almost done here. There's just a couple of things that I wanted to do. I think I'm going to darken this slope just a little bit here, bring more attention to this. I quite like these little pinnacles here, so I'm going to brighten those up just a little bit. And the way I can do that is I'll just go over to the brush tool here, and I'll just generally paint over here. I don't know why my computer's acting up so slow today. Okay, and I'll just unclick that. Now I'm going to brighten that up, so probably the easiest way is just increase the exposure just slightly. It doesn't have to be a lot. Oh, that looks pretty good. Now if we zoom in on that, if I'm concerned about the adjustments that I just made on the shadow areas, I can always go down to the range mask here again, to the luminance area, and just bring the shadow slider to the center a little bit so it doesn't affect the shadows as much. So I could actually increase the exposure slightly. So let's brighten it up quite a bit, and then just keep bringing up the shadow slider, and that'll actually bring the shadows back down to what they were originally. So if you click on this little tab here, you can see the effect that we've had on that little area. Okay, now I'm going to do the same with this section here. I'm just going to bring the exposure up slightly. Now I have to be a little bit careful with this one because I don't want to bring the mask over to the sky here because the range mask might have a hard time with that. We'll go to a new brush so we're not affecting this area here. Show selected mask overlay, and then we'll just paint this. Okay, and we'll just turn that off. And I'm just going to bring the exposure up. Not too much, just, that's way too much. Just about there. And again, I'm going to go down to range mask here, luminance, and just adjust that slider. And let's see the effect we made on that. There we go. So we'll just zoom out here. Okay, and then lastly, two more things to do. I'm just going to darken this slightly and brighten this up as much as I can without blowing out the highlights. So I think the first thing I'll do is just darken this a little bit. So we'll go for a new brush again. And this time I'm going to feather it just a little bit more. Turn the mask on again so I can see what I'm doing here. Now, if I didn't want to go over the edges, I could turn on the auto mask, and actually maybe I'll do that. So just turn on the auto mask. And this is the area that I want darkened, this area here. So let's just start painting in there. Like I said, I'm not sure why my computer is acting up today, but probably have too many things running on in the background, as usual. Alright, that's pretty good. We'll just turn that off. And then I'm just going to adjust the exposure. So maybe I'll just bring the shadows down. We can try the exposure, but we don't want those blacks to get too clogged up there. So let's have a look at that. It's pretty good. Might be a bit too much. Alright, so we'll have a look at the pinnacles here. And again, we'll just turn the mask on. This time I'm not going to feather it so much. So we'll go over, get a new brush. And just reduce the feathering just a bit. And we're just going to brighten up this area here. We don't have to brighten it up very much because it's already getting quite bright as it is. We'll turn the auto mask is already on, so oh, this computer is driving me nuts. Okay, that should do it. Okay, so we'll just bring up the exposure just a little bit. That's way too much. We could bring up the whites a little bit. That might. And let's see how that's affected that area. Okay, we'll just zoom out here. And you can see now that your attention definitely goes over to this area now more than this. So I think overall, I mean, I might tweak a few sections, like the clouds here are quite a bit brighter than over here. So, you know, I might brighten this section up here a little bit maybe. I don't know, sometimes I have to sit on these images for a little while and, you know, keep going back to them every now and then. Okay, now lastly, I'm just going to add a little bit more saturation to the image. Not too much, because I don't want it to be over the top with color. And I'm also going to crop this a little bit. Now you'll notice that down here, this is a little bit distracting, but I think I might crop this to a pano. The more I look at it, the more I think it'll lend itself to a pano. So just go into the crop tool here, We'll crop out that corner section there. Oh, just undo this lock here. I'm going to crop out these trees up here. Bring this down and start to bring this up. Something like that. And there we go. There's the finished product. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please, if you have any comments about the way that I've processed this image, what you liked or what you disliked, my cropping, anything that you want to talk about, be sure to leave in the comments below. All right, so this coming Saturday, hopefully I'll have a video out for you from my recent trip to China. And until then, please be sure to give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. And as always, if you enjoy the content on my channel, be sure to subscribe. All right, everybody. Thanks ever so much for watching. And until Saturday, happy shooting.